Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now, here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now in our second season of the show, and we continue to be excited to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. We look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's very special show. Now, on this January 2nd, our first show of the new year, we are so excited and honored to talk about something that is so vital to the quality of our new upcoming year and something that in and of itself is so very important to how we navigate this new year, as well as how we navigate all of our future new years. And it's something that is at the very heart and essence of the Healthy Living, Healthy Planet radio show, as well as our mission, which, of course, is to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between health of humans, ourselves, and health of the planet. And, of course, at the same time, it helps us meet our goal of being what we like to think as explainers in chief. Today, we're going to talk about the 2020 Countdown Report on Health and Climate Change that's put out by The Lancet. This report is typically called the Lancet Report or the Countdown Report. This report is like the Super Bowl and perhaps like what you might want to call the Holy Grail of evidence-based science and research that connects the two existential components of our lives and our world. The 2020 report of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate, it brings together 35 academic institutions and United Nations agencies from every continent, and it structures its work across key sections of activity. It is a report that is annually awaited by the world, by governments all over the world, by leaders, decision makers, businesses, and policymakers. And we think it's very vital to make sure that it is known about and brought to you, our audience of ordinary folks in our everyday lives. And here to help us out with this is Dr. Jeremy Hess and Dr. Renee Salas, both of whom are authors of this very important report. Dr. Jeremy Hess is professor of environmental and occupational health sciences, global health, and emergency medicine at the University of Washington. He serves as the director of the University of Washington's Center for Health and the Global Environment. Dr. Hess has an MD and an MPH in global environmental health and is residency trained and board certified in emergency medicine. Dr. Hess is a lead author on several national and international climate assessments. And as I mentioned before, he is also an author on the annual Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change, of course, which we're going to dissect today. Dr. Hess is also a consultant for the Climate and Health Program at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, where he previously worked as medical advisor on the health effects of climate change and evidence-based interventions to enhance preparedness and promote climate change adaptation at both the state and federal levels. Welcome, Jeremy. We're so glad you could join us today.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And our other guest is Dr. Renee Salas. Dr. Renee Salas is a Yerby Fellow at the Center for Climate, Health, and the Global Environment at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and affiliated faculty and previous Burke Fellow at the Harvard Global Health Institute. Dr. Salas is also a practicing emergency medicine physician in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. Dr. Salas focuses her career on the intersection of climate change, health, and healthcare delivery, both through the generation of new knowledge and translating and applying existing knowledge to different sectors through research, education, and outreach. She engages in research to better understand how climate change is impacting the healthcare system and to develop evidence-based adaptation. Dr. Salas has published a variety of articles in the New England Journal of Medicine, and of course, she also served as the lead author on the 2018 and 2019 Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change brief for the United States, and again in 2020. Dr. Salas communicates the important and novel connections between the climate crisis, health, and she was founder and past chair of the Climate Change and Health Interest Group at the Society of Academic Emergency Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Salas. We're so glad you could join us today.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thanks for having me.
It's an honor for us. Very impressive folks. And we're just really excited to really present this, dissect it, and make sure that our listening audience understands what the report is bringing forth as well as its importance. So let's start by you all telling us about the Countdown Report on Health and Climate Change. When and why did it get started? Who started it? Its history, and how did you both become involved? And also important to me is, why is it called the Countdown? It conjures up some very important things to me, but I want to make sure it's conjuring up the right thing. And so we'll start with you, Renee, since I also see that you have been on the planning committee for the report's creation. So can you start us out?
Yes. So I think this report was really born out of the idea that you can't fix what you haven't measured. And so their goal was to systematically and annually begin to understand how climate change is harming health around the world, but also to understand what our response has been, or unfortunately, our response, lack thereof, has been in order to better align where we need to be spending our resources and our time. And so the goal is for this report to really inform conversations in advance of what's called Convention of the Parties, or COP, which is otherwise known sort of as the Paris Agreement, which is arguably the greatest public health pact of our time. So we really aim, in order for this data, to help inform decision makers at country levels to know what the state of climate and health is.
And Jeremy, I understand, too, that your focus on this report is more of the global level, and that it has a number of spin-offs or components that are specific to various countries. Can you tell us about that? And tell us why ordinary people in their everyday lives, why this should be important to them.
Yeah. Well, as Renee outlined, the report started several years ago as a global effort. And every year there's a global report that is primarily meant to influence people in the climate change community who are attending the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change conferences every year that happen in toward the end of the year, late November and December.
That's the COP. Okay.
To emphasize the importance of health in the conversation and to highlight that efforts to reduce climate change, reduce emissions that lead to dangerous climate change, all have a really significant health component, and that reducing emissions improves health. That's one really important message, and one that was not getting out into the world as much as it needed to. And that was one of the primary reasons for starting the report. But as climate change has progressed, another important message of the report is that it threatens health, and we need to track that and get a better sense of exactly what the health impacts are and how well the health sector is preparing to address those impacts. And so to answer your question, there's the global report, and then there are country-level briefs. And the country-level briefs actually speak more to, I think, your audience and what they should be concerned about in their day-to-day lives, because it highlights, the U.S. country brief highlights the impact we're seeing here and the health and lives of Americans day-to-day and how those interact with climate change. And so the U.S. brief, which takes the same data but presents it in a different way, is really what I think highlights things for your listeners.
Tell us again, though, why it's called Countdown.
Yeah, it's called the Countdown, that's a common question. And it's called the Countdown because it's a countdown to 2030 and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals for the United Nations.
We're going to go to break now, and after the break, we will be back with Dr. Jeremy Hess and Dr. Renee Salas talking about the Countdown report on health and climate change. And this is a very interesting conversation and a very vital one. We'll be right back. And we're going to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, promoting environmental awareness through expo, conferences, film festival, interactive experiences, and now EarthX streaming TV. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free online for download at nadallas.com. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens. Since 1951, they are the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. Our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lynndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. As we continue our conversation on the 2020 Countdown Report on Health and Climate Change that's been put out by The Lancet. It's called The Lancet Report. And we are back with Dr. Jeremy Hess and Dr. Renee Salas, both of whom are authors of the report. So we want to start with you, Jeremy. If you can talk to us more about how do you see your own work reflected in this report, and how do you see the Lancet Countdown frame what has been your experience in your work in the healthcare field?
Well, Renee and I are both emergency medicine physicians. So we both work in really busy, large academic emergency departments, and we are part of a specialty and of faculty groups that do everything in emergency medicine. And emergency medicine, of course, provides frontline care for some of the most vulnerable populations in America. And we provide probably about a third, maybe a little more, of the acute medical care in the country. So we see a lot of everything. And we take care of disasters, we take care of environmental emergencies, we take care of pre-hospital, emergency medical services, and we're the safety net for vulnerable populations in the U.S. And so we see climate change is squarely affecting all of that. We're seeing new presentations for diseases that were uncommon in certain areas, and they come to the emergency department or the ED. We see impacts on pre-hospital care and emergency medical services that are dealing with more disasters and trauma-related care and exacerbations of chronic disease from heat exposure and other things. We see changes in toxicological presentations around the country. We, of course, are seeing more frequent and severe disasters, hurricanes, floods, wildfires, and all of that funnels into the emergency care system. And so we see it all around us. Of course, we see a bunch of other things too, and I think that's a really important point that we make in the brief, that all of the determinants of health that affect people's health in this country and elsewhere, also we see that too, and we see the interaction between poverty and racism and marginalization and exposure to these climate and weather hazards. And we see them compound on our most vulnerable. And that's exactly who we see in our EDs every day.
Back to what you all are seeing in your emergency medicine practice, what would you say is the most pronounced or perhaps the most unthought of heretofore condition or presentation that you're seeing that is a result of climate change?
Yeah, I think, one thing is heat. As extreme heat rises and we're experiencing longer, more frequent heat waves, then, those often don't make headlines like other extreme weather events like hurricanes or wildfires, which are being driven by climate change. And, people often die in their homes quietly. And so I think one of the numbers that we present in the U.S. brief was that in 2018, it's an estimated 19,000 people over the age of 65 died in 2018 from extreme heat. And, that's a statistic, and numbers can numb, but stories stick. And I think, that river analogy I used before, that we're not only pulling people out of the river. Like there was an elderly gentleman that I saw whose wife called 911 because he was acting confused. And he lived in lower income housing, and the EMS crew said when they opened the door, it felt like they were being hit by the Sierra desert heat. And they didn't have any air conditioning, and they only had one window that was cracked open. And when we took this man's core temperature, it was 106 degrees Fahrenheit. So his body was literally cooking, and he had the life-threatening form of heat illness called heat stroke. And so, this 19,000 number is something that I see reflected. And again, heat is something we experience universally across the U.S. And it's something that we have to take really seriously because these are our neighbors or our grandparents or our parents that are being harmed.
Indeed. I noticed that the Countdown report covers a number of key segments. What would you say are the most important of those segments that it covers globally and then for the U.S., or are they the same, or what?
Well, the global report covers environmental hazards and exposures related to climate change. It covers health impacts. It covers activity in the health sector, that is meant to track these things and address them. It tracks progress on what we call mitigation or efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and it tracks media engagement with climate and health broadly. And so we, in the U.S. brief, we get the data from the global countdown and reflect it back in the U.S. brief. We tend to focus on things that are particularly relevant for the U.S., so we don't always cover all of those things in the U.S. brief every year. The global report does cover the entire waterfront every year with a focus on some important findings.
Yeah, and I think for the, in the U.S. brief, what we really highlight in three big takeaways from this year is, I think, first off, that climate change is harming the health of everyone today. Again, this isn't a distant threat, and it's not just about polar bears and icebergs. It's about our own health. But there are certain groups, like the old and the young and certain vulnerable populations like Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are disproportionately bearing the health harms. And then, the second big point is the fact that air pollution and climate change have the same root cause, and that's the burning of fossil fuels. But that means that if we can get to the root cause, so transition away from fossil fuels, we can start to fix and try to lessen the impacts of both air pollution and climate change. And I think the third one is really hopefully one of hope in the sense that, we have the solutions or treatments, as we often call it, because, climate action is a prescription for better health. And these treatments are available, they're affordable, they're scalable now, and we are in that critical window of action. And we need to implement it holistically. I mean, as Jeremy mentioned before, so many of these issues are intertwined. And so if we think about all of the big issues facing our nation today, like, the pandemic or health inequities from structural racism and climate change, I mean, all of them, if we intertwine solutions because they're interconnected, then we can really begin to solve and mitigate these problems all at once, which brings me a lot of hope and optimism.
You mentioned vulnerable populations, and a couple that I've heard mentioned that we don't often hear are children and women, and especially children. I think one of our last shows in our first season was about the environmental health impacts on children that people seem to overlook for whatever reason. Has your report dealt with that?
Yeah, so the 2019 report, which again also stresses that all of these reports really build on one another.
Right.
And so the report from 2019 and 2018 are still very relevant today. So the U.S. brief in 2019 really focused on that message of how children were really bearing the brunt and how we don't know what it means for a child to be continually suffer the insults of repeated exposures from climate change. So, not only are they experiencing more pollen or more heat or more, air pollution, and what does that mean over the course of a child's life? And so I think that global report also really focused that message of that we have the opportunity to choose what path that a child alive today can walk. They can walk a path with a healthier future that is more equitable and just. Or if we continue as business as usual, then honestly, it's going to be catastrophic potentially for children around the world now.
That's why the youth climate change movement, I think, is so important and powerful. You mentioned that the reports build on each other. Do they also look at or compare how particular indices have gotten better or worse from year to year? And that leads me to what findings or what differences or what exacerbations are you seeing in the 2020 report compared to the 2019 report?
Yeah, so they do build on each other year to year, and we do compare trends. We tend to compare longer-term trends because climate change is really a long-term exposure in many ways, and so we're looking at changes over time. But the 2020 global report was frankly the most concerning ever in terms of the worsening exposures from heat, exposures to undernutrition and damage to food crops and wildfires in particular.
We're going to go to break, but we're going to start right back at that last phrase you said on the other side, and that is that the 2020 countdown report was one of the most concerning ever. Thank you. We'll be right back after the break. We have been with Dr. Jeremy Hess from the University of Washington and Dr. Renee Salas from Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. Thank you all. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We're back talking about the 2020 Countdown Report on health and climate change. A very important report. I like to call it the Super Bowl and the Holy Grail of science and evidence-based reporting on that interconnection between health and climate and, of course, environment. And we are back with Dr. Jeremy Hess and Dr. Renee Salas, both of whom are authors of these reports, Jeremy at the global level and Renee on the U.S.-based level. And right before the break, Jeremy had spiked our antenna with his statement that the 2020 Countdown Report was one of the most concerning ever. So, Jeremy, I'm throwing this back to you to continue that conversation. Why so?
Well, pretty much across the board, we're seeing the exposures that we worried about several years ago starting to emerge, and we're seeing clear health impacts as a result. So we're seeing a lot more extreme heat exposure, and as a result, we are losing more people in vulnerable groups. We've seen heat-related deaths in people over 65 increase by 54%, going almost to 300,000 globally in 2018. We've seen big impacts on labor productivity. It's dangerous to work outside in the heat. People get injured. They don't process as well cognitively. And so we're seeing reductions in worker productivity in many settings, including settings that aren't actually so hot. It's kind of counterintuitive, but we do see impacts in Washington State, for instance, on worker productivity related to heat, even though it's really generally not that hot here. We're seeing widespread increase in wildfires. In this report, we have some new indicators related to wildfire incidents, and we found that 128 countries experienced an increase in population exposure to wildfires since the 2000s. And we are also seeing that national health planning is really not keeping pace with this, that some countries are taking this very seriously and trying to get out ahead of it, but a lot are not. And so we can expect these impacts to worsen going forward, both because the exposures are going to worsen and because we're really not jumping on the problem in the way that we need to.
Why do you think that we're not moving faster on a lot of these things which are not even in dispute, like the wildfires? As I was talking with my guest several weeks back on our show on wildfires, I wonder why we don't see local codes that perhaps mandate or dictate some type of fire retardant building materials or something like this. I know that there are deniers in each of these sectors, but you can't deny the wildfires.
No, you can't deny the wildfires. I mean, I think that in this country, we're in the midst of a crisis around processing and agreeing on information. And so we have this new step to go through that we didn't used to have to go through of agreeing on what is true. And you're right, you can't deny the wildfires, but you certainly can bicker endlessly about strategies to manage them and the underlying cause. And that, unfortunately, seems to be what happens in many cases.
Renee, what has been, I guess, the greatest differences that you've seen between the 2019 and the 2020 countdown report? And why do these differences occur, and why do they matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think the U.S. brief echoes what Jeremy highlighted was seen on the global level. And, there were some differences in the way that we did our research that counted for some of the differences in the numbers. But I mean, I think overall, when we look at the change over time, over the past decade or two, we're seeing things getting worse in the U.S. as well. And, that just is sort of what I call like the canary in the coal mine, right? In the sense that we recognize that there is a problem here, but we still are in the window where we can act.
Companies like, the Fortune 100, the Fortune 500, where are they on all of this?
So it's a great point, and I think that every year we have made this bigger and better and a larger platform and involved more voices. And we are looking to do the same in the coming year, and we need to have voices from business and from other sectors. So we're not there yet, but any business leaders listening, we're coming for you. We want your input.
I think that's the challenge that and I put me with you all as people who care about this and know it and know that it has to be pushed out, is the businesses, when you go to their sites and depending on what meeting they're at, they're all saying the right things coming out of their mouths. That's why I ask you what involvement you're seeing. So that there really needs to be some drill down and some more serious action by our large businesses globally, I would say.
Well, I think that to dovetail on that, you're right. They are making the right moves, and particularly a lot of corporations out here in the Pacific Northwest, Microsoft, Amazon, Starbucks, they're all local, and they're doing great things, and their rhetoric and their commitments are exactly what they should be, the connection with health is not always there. And we want to highlight that reducing greenhouse gas emissions is good for health, and it's good for the health of people who work at these companies. It's good for the communities where they're based. And that message, I think, has not been part of what has been coming out of their mouths. And I would like to see that more.
We're at a really profound moment where health is central to our society in a way that it's never been before. So, I mean, we want to continue that trend and really capitalize on our moment and continue to put health central to climate action across every sector.
Exactly. And Renee, as the lead author on the U.S. brief, can you break down for us what you see as the three most important findings from that will resonate with our U.S. listeners? I mean, I think, to highlight what I already sort of listed as sort of the three big topic areas, I think I use this opportunity to highlight three of the big solutions that we put forth. And I think the first off is that where we spend our money reflects our priorities. And so we need to stop subsidizing health-harming fossil fuels because we know that that's actually subsidizing the health harm. And instead invest in our public health infrastructure and make sure that we can be prepared for climate change, the next pandemic, and other threats that are harming our communities. And second is the fact that, a prescription for health includes renewable electricity and healthy transportation options. And then, the third point is that we really need to put health central across all sectors, and it's really an all hands on deck moment. So past briefs have talked about how healthcare has to be at the forefront of minimizing their carbon production and greenhouse gases. But we highlight here in this brief about ways that agriculture can do that and at the same time reduce air pollution today, which will actually make communities that are producing the food that we desperately need healthier as well. And I put this out to both of you all in terms of your opinion really briefly. We got 2 minutes before we go to the break. In a lot of health conditions, you Google it on the internet, and it'll say caused by this, that, and the other. Do you think we can ever reach the point when, for all of these health conditions, that there is a segment at the end that says possible environmental or climate impacts? Heat, fossil fuel, etc.
I think we're there now. I think, people tend to focus on proximate causes, the thing that most immediately is associated with the disease. Lyme disease is caused by ticks. But if you look upstream and you focus on what governs tick ecology, you find that it has to do with temperature and rainfall, and that warming has increased the presence of these ticks in the northern U.S. and in the Midwest. And we're seeing an increase in Lyme disease. And so you have to make an effort to link the immediate cause with the upstream drivers.
I think you hit on something, is make an effort. And I think maybe that is a nexus where some more work needs to be done. In my other life, I was a public interest advocate, and what I've learned is that you have to frame things for people so that it jumps out at them, because many of us will not make the effort. Anyway, we'll be back on the other side to talk more about this. We've been with Dr. Jeremy Hess from the University of Washington and Dr. Renee Salas from Harvard Medical School. We'll be right back. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, promoting environmental awareness through expo, conferences, film festival, interactive experiences, and now EarthX streaming TV. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority, or the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. First issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central markets, and many other locations, as well as available free online for download at nadallas.com. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas. offering gardening, plant education, concierge services, and DIY classes. And finally, our last sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach. Looking at the whole body, specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lynndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to our special show on the 2020 Countdown Report on Health and Climate Change that is annually produced by The Lancet. Again, the Super Bowl and Holy Grail of science-based reports looking at and connecting our health and climate change. And we are back with Dr. Jeremy Hess from the University of Washington. He is an emergency medicine physician, and Dr. Renee Salas with Harvard Medical School, and she also is an emergency medical physician. Thank you all for being with us. I want to move and start this segment with Renee. And you had talked to us earlier about the important findings for the U.S. brief. And I want to connect it with COVID. We hear from time to time that COVID does have that climate change connection, but I'm not sure that people get it. So we want to talk first to Renee about this from the U.S. perspective, and then we're going to punt it over to Jeremy to talk about from the global perspective.
Yeah, so I think my framework is that the intersections between climate change and COVID really help embody how climate change underlies problems and makes them worse. So, for example, we know that climate change is making extreme weather worse, like hurricanes and wildfires, like you've highlighted previously on the show and like we've talked about earlier. And so if you don't have air conditioning or you have to evacuate your home because a hurricane's coming or the wildfire's coming, then it's pretty hard for you to be able to maintain physical distancing and try to prevent the spread of COVID. So you're putting yourself and potentially others at risk. And so that's one way where it's just sort of making it harder for us to do what we need to do with the pandemic. But I think one of the more profound things that really seem to be resonating are kind of the parallels between climate change and the pandemic. And that's the fact that, we're very clearly seeing played out on a really accelerated runway what happens when we don't listen to the science or we delay action and people die and get sick. And so we can take this lesson, and I think this moment of regret that many of us have and things we wish we would have done in January of this year to help prevent where we are right now with COVID. But we can still be in sort of this January to March window of climate change, and we still have the opportunity for us to act on the science and to do what needs to be done. And I think, lastly, before I'll turn it over to Jeremy, it's just the fact that, I think this has also been an awakening moment for everyone about how much the environment harms our health. Again, whether we're talking about invisible greenhouse gases that are produced in one part of the world or affecting another part halfway around, or a virus halfway around the world is impacting the world, or how a bat, can really change and alter the course of our lives here in the U.S. So we have to think bigger globally and act together and recognize how the environment is harming our health today.
Indeed. Jeremy?
So for the global report, COVID is both a cautionary tale and an opportunity. It's a cautionary tale in the sense that the world really, frankly, largely ignored or brushed off warnings about pandemic preparedness for decades. And when one emerged, we were caught with our pants down a little bit, and the global response was not as robust as it could have been, and we could have much more effectively contained it. That's to say nothing of our own flummoxed response here in the United States, which really was sometimes a bit of an embarrassment. And similar to pandemic preparedness, we've been issuing warnings about climate change and its health impacts for about a decade now. I really don't want to be in the place that we're in with COVID, where we essentially are pointing to all of the things that we said would happen, and they have. And Bill Gates this year highlighted that the costs we've suffered during this pandemic, which feel like a once-in-a-lifetime event, are in fact likely to be pretty comparable to what we'll suffer year on year if the climate continues to change at the level that it's changing now, and we continue to emit at the level we're emitting now. So we have a real opportunity to build back better, and during the recovery from COVID, to invest in a different kind of economy where we focus on renewables, reduce emissions, and build protections both for the environment and for public health. They're much more robust than we've had going into this.
Indeed, if there's anything that can be remotely thought of as an opportunity provided by COVID, then that is one, to highlight the connections with climate change and build and adapt, for sure. And, we at Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio did our first on-air broadcast in October of 2019. And we were consistently told over our first year by many of the scientists and researchers who were guests on our show that something like this was coming, or that something like this was expected. They told me enough that I believed it and explained it to our listeners. And as you said, it's no fun to say, I told you so, but we're being told these things for the last decade. So hopefully we'll get there. And the report also specifically said that 2020 is just a preview, and that if we don't fix climate change, we're going to be putting lives at risk and fueling everything from the deadly pollution to dangerous bacterial growth in America's waters. And again, we're seeing a lot of this already. But with that, as we head into the future, again, with potentially increased environmental diseases and or crisis, how do our public health department leaders, medical professionals, and us ordinary people in our everyday lives, how do we better prepare to better mitigate the spread of disease and spanning impact? What to do for the future? We'll start with you on that, Jeremy.
We need to continue to invest in improved tracking to have a better sense of exactly what's happening where. We need to continue to, as you highlighted, connect the proximal with the upstream and highlight the importance of action on climate change to improve health generally. Increasingly, we need to prepare for specific climate-sensitive hazards. We need to prepare for wildfires in places where they weren't fighting them in December. We need to prepare for outbreaks of waterborne disease, et cetera. And we need to invest much more heavily in our research infrastructure around these issues, because right now, while we're seeing glimpses of action in the health sector, we see hardly any investment on the part of NIH and other federal bodies that are responsible for public health research related to climate and health. It's vanishingly small. And without looking, we're not going to know.
Thank you, Jeremy. And Renee, you have the last word on this.
I think it's recognizing the time is now. This is our moment to act, and we really have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to use these stimulus funds that are going to be put forward to really accelerate where we need to go, because the solutions and the treatments are there. But we have to talk about the fact that this is a prescription for health. Climate action is a prescription for health. And so we all need to make those connections with our families, with people we work with your doctor, and, with decision makers, both, in your cities, on your states, and federally, because this is just good, common sense medical prescription. And I hope it's a prescription that everyone wants to run and go fill, because it will improve health now by lowering air pollution and really create a better future for our children and a more equitable and just world. So we can do this, but we have to do it together, and we have to make health the reason that we're doing it.
Thank you both for being with us. You have made us smarter today, and we look forward to having you all back and thank you for the work that you do and that you have done on this report. It is vitally important. And we certainly at Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio have a commitment and take on the commitment for pushing it out, making sure that ordinary people know it exists and it's important, and that people like you are committed to doing it in a scientific, research-based way. So thank you very much. We've been with Dr. Jeremy Hess, University of Washington, and Dr. Renee Salas with Harvard Medical School today, telling us and helping us understand the 2020 Lancet report on health and climate change. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourself. And each of these tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up one way or the other to the change that we each live through. This is Bernice Butler, your host, and thank you. And join us again next week for more Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. Thank you.